Hello, Trail Seeker, and welcome to another exciting episode of the Learn True Health podcast. Today we have with us an amazing naturopathic physician who's also a professor. She teaches baby doctors, teaches naturopathic doctors in training at Basti University, and she specializes in botany, herbal medicine, and she's an amazing healer, and I sat down with her in person to discuss how we could grow, even if we just grew some herbs, what could we do to plunge our fingers into the soil and help our body, to nourish our body with herbs and vegetables. So if you're even a little bit interested in how you could grow that green thumb of yours and utilize naturopathic philosophies to nourish your body with beautiful herbs and vegetables from your own garden, then you'll love today's interview. She also has some wonderful stories of healing using herbs, and even if you personally don't grow them, maybe you have a gardener friend who you could ask to grow some herbs for you. And before we start today's interview, I am so grateful to those Patreons who joined in April to support the Learn True Health podcast. John Riccardi, Michelle Chern, Nicole Pfeffer, and Cheryl Michael. Thank you so much for being Patreon members and supporting the Learn True Health podcast. If you love this show, definitely consider joining the Patreon movement, supporting Learn True Health. It's really where you can, I love Patreon because it's a place where you can connect with those who are making a difference in your life, whether it's artists or content creators or those authors, those making documentaries, and you can personally support them. So you can go to patreon.com/learntruehealth or go to learntruehealth.com, and in the upper right corner in the menu you'll see where you can click on join us to support us in Patreon. You could support us by pledging $1 a month or $5. At the $25 a month level, I will send you a book and you join our Learn True Health book club. It's a lot of fun. We just started it together. There's about 9 of us doing it right now, and we get together weekly with a live Zoom call where we all can see each other and chat about the book. It's a lot of fun. So if you love, or if you'd at least like to have a structure in which supports you to read books that'll advance your health and then have great health discussions about it, then I definitely encourage you to join the Learn Your Health Book Hub by becoming a Patreon supporter. So thank you, John, Michelle, Nicole, and Cheryl, for being the new Patreon supporters that joined us in April. And thank you so much for being Learn True Health listeners and sharing the podcast to help as many people as we can gain their health back. I know you'll love today's interview. I had a lot of fun recording it in my living room of all places. Enjoy. Welcome to the Learn True Health podcast. I'm your host, Ashley James. This is episode 254. Well, I'm really excited for today's interview. I have not done an in-person interview in a long time. When I first started the podcast, I had the pleasure of meeting with the most amazing naturopathic doctors in person. That's what helped us launch the podcast. And now, of course, for the last 2 years, I've been doing mostly Skype interviews. You, however, have been sort of a celebrity to some naturopaths that I know locally. My naturopath in particular idolizes you and says that she wants to be Dr. Jenn when she grows up.
Oh, wow.
So you've got some big shoes to fill. But it's such a pleasure to have you here today. We have with us Dr. Jenn Dazey, who for the last 15 years has been part of Basti University's core faculty. Basti University being an amazing school to become a naturopathic physician. And you also have a private practice, and you also have 2 wonderful young children. And so you've been very, very busy. But we're here today to talk about a lot of things. And one thing I'm really excited about is that you have a book called Naturopathic Gardening. And I have a copy of it here. It looks really cool. And you designed it for your students. But really, anyone could benefit from reading this book.
That's right.
Yeah. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah,
It doesn't hurt that we happen to be neighbors.
Right. It's like we just live like a few minutes away from each other. I just love it. I have so much to ask you, but first I'd love for us to explore what had you become a naturopath? What guided you in your life? What happened in your life that made you want to become a naturopathic physician?
Well, when I was a pretty young kid, my mom would teach classes on wild greens and edible plants, and they called her the edible weed lady. And we never called that herbalist. But then, as a teenager, I got a part-time job in a shop, and I didn't really know what the shop was. It was an herbal apothecary shop. So I worked at that job under the table for $5 an hour in Duvall, Washington, and learned so much about these herbs and realized that I already had quite a bit of knowledge. I had always wanted to be a doctor and planned to go to formal medical school, but working in that herb shop really opened my eyes to the fact that people don't always agree with mainstream medicine. In fact, sometimes people get harmed uh, with surgeries that they didn't necessarily choose, but then they ended up with associated nerve damage or with the toxicity relating to medications taken for chronic conditions. And at a very young age, I realized that maybe medical school wasn't exactly what I was looking for. I knew I wanted to help people, but the herbs and the plants and nutrition really spoke to me more strongly than learning just about drugs and formal medical protocols.
In those young formative years, did you, working at the apothecary, did you see herbal medicine actually help people, or did you see where someone come in sick and then you actually had an experience of herbal medicine helping someone heal?
Absolutely. At that herb shop, we served so many types of people, some that were jaded and just were looking for alternatives.
So it wasn't a placebo effect.
No, others that really knew what they were doing and they'd come from a long folk tradition of using herbs. And still others that were new to it and maybe they were just learning about formulating teas. Tinctures weren't really a thing back then. This was in the early 90s. So I believe it was 1990 when I began working there. And tinctures weren't really so much a thing, but bulk herbs were. And being the only employee at that little shop, I wasn't allowed to get sick. I wasn't allowed to take a sick day because they relied on me quite a bit. So if I started to get the sniffles or if somebody came in with a really virulent cough or condition, they would immediately put me on a preventative protocol
of tea.
And I have my tried and true teas that worked for me back then, and I swear by them for myself and my patients and my family now.
I love that you mentioned that, because when we think about herbal medicine, tea is the most gentle, right? And tinctures being the sort of on the strong end, right? And kind of I think the American culture is to like do something really heavy and hard and hit it with all you got. Whereas in herbal medicine, something like you said, a preventive tea can be incredibly healing and tonifying, and you don't need to always bring out the big guns.
Sure, and there's qualities to tea that are therapeutic in and of themselves, like the process of making a tea. But then just simply having plain hot water without any herbs in it is going to be warming. It's going to help open your pores. It's going to give you more vitality, vital energy through the heat. Or if you have a cold infusion, that just cold water in and of itself is going to be refreshing and have medicinal qualities to it without adding the herbs. Of course, it depends on which herbs you put in there as to whether it's going to be mild and gentle and safe or something that you really need to pay attention to the dose and look for some side effects or a therapeutic threshold. But yes, I do love teas and I fall in love with them over and over again. I have daily tonics that I switch which herbs are in there each day depending on how I feel, but making sure that my nutritional bases are covered.
I know that everyone's different, and so we couldn't possibly do like a sort of a tea prescription for everyone. But if you had something that you just love to tell everyone to try, what would it be?
Oh, everyone already knows this one. Nettles.
So stinging
So
nettles tea?
stinging nettles make up usually 50% of my daily teas, and the other 50% will be whatever calls to me that day. And I try to keep it mineral dense when it's a tonic tea, but often some of the adaptogen herbs come into play. And adaptogen is an herb that just helps you cope with day-to-day stress. And
Okay.
that could be environmental stress like cold exposure, or it could be stress from work, emotional stress, exertional stress. We have all kinds of stressors that adaptogens can help us with.
Right. I know that ashwagandha is one of them, right?
It's one of my very favorites.
I had a
And
friend that called me ashwagandha because my name's Ashley. And then I found out it's like it was his favorite herb. When you say
yeah,
tonifying tea, is there a difference in brewing a tea that would make it a tonifying tea or make it a more nourishing tea?
sure. Now, people don't often have time to do a very long infusion or a very long brewing tea. But most of the tonic teas I recommend infusing overnight and then drinking the next day, or infusing it for 1 hour minimum. So I'll have a great big jar with a lid and infuse that with a little sweater on. I'll put a couple of ski hats on it to keep it nice and cozy
And hot.
and hot so
Okay.
that it infuses for a very long time. In fact, if I do that at night, just out on the kitchen countertop, it'll still be hot in the morning. And that's a
Oh.
nice long infusion. I'll have it over ice if it's warm out, or if it's cool. Excuse me, if I want to stay cool, I'll put it over ice, or I'll add a little bit more boiling water to it to heat it up if I want it to have a little bit more warmth.
Very cool. Now, getting back to, so you're in there you are, the early 90s. You are loving working in the shop. You're gaining all the benefits of these teas and you're seeing people heal themselves. How did you discover Basti University? How did you discover becoming a naturopathic physician?
Well, it was in that shop when I was looking at different medical schools and applying to University of Washington Medical School. Um, Somebody came in and asked me what my plans were, what college I was going to, and they assumed I was going to Bastyr University. Now, Bastyr University was in Wallingford in downtown Seattle at that time. And it was kind of a far drive for me to go in, and I would have to actually find an apartment or another place to live near there. And that delayed me for a little while. And then in 1996, the university moved closer. It moved to the east side. And I took that as an example or as a sign that I was on the right track. And if I didn't go to that school, it was going to come to me. So
Nice.
my experience at that herb shop was pretty profound. And my childhood growing up with gardeners and plant lovers and wild foodists, I think it was the right calling for me to attend Bastyr. And what a great environment. Beautiful gardens, beautiful woods,
Oh, it's
and
so beautiful.
incredible people.
Yeah, and so you've been you're basically like a professor. You've been teaching for there for 15 years. What do you teach?
I teach botanical medicine.
Of
Of
course.
course I do. The first class that I taught there was organic gardening. And
Very cool. What's the difference between organic gardening and what someone would do by accident if they just threw stuff in the ground? Like, how intentional do you have to be with organic gardening?
I guess there's quite a bit of subjectivity there. The simple definition of organic gardening is just not using chemicals. So, not using fertilizers that are chemical based or any of the pesticides or herbicides. That's really all you need in order to be an organic gardener by definition. However, as an earth steward or as a naturopathic gardener, you're going to want to treat the garden more as a whole living system and take that holistic approach even further, where you're supporting an ecosystem and you're creating the ability for the soil to produce nutritious food for years and years and years. And simply refraining from using chemicals doesn't guarantee that that soil will be able to produce crops forever, ever. You need to do much more and know what you're doing enough to read the signs and symptoms of when it's time to take a little action.
Is this biodynamic farming?
Biodynamic farming is Rudolf Steiner's way of gardening, and there are some very specific preparations and times of the season that you can do things. Biodynamic takes organic to a much different level. And I do love biodynamics, but I think there's a learning curve there and a willingness to take a leap of faith and do some preparations that might sound a little absurd at first. An example of that is taking some raw, fresh cow manure from a lactating cow and stuffing it into a horn from a lactating cow, burying it in the ground for a couple of seasons, and digging it back up, and then succussing it in a big barrel of water for a really long time, and then putting that in the ground or spraying it on the ground when you plant. So that's the BD 500. It's one of the most basic biodynamic preparations. Does it make sense? Not right away. You have to really do some pondering before it starts to make complete sense. But you don't need to go that far in order to be a very holistic gardener.
I heard once, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that one of the biodynamic techniques for getting rid of pesky moles is to like catch a mole and burn it, and then take it, spread its ashes onto the garden. Is that true?
I haven't heard of that one, to be
I
honest
just
with you.
heard some weird things about biodynamic farming. Kind of like chanting in the moonlight of the full moon.
You'd
And
have to be
all
the
that
right
stuff.
person to
Yeah.
be able to cremate a mole and spread it around. But I think there are differing levels. Some of these preparations you can purchase online and have sent to you. And I do use some of the biodynamic techniques in my own garden, but I'm just not organized enough yet to go all the way.
Right? Well, you must get great results. Obviously having you advanced to the level of being able to teach this, and you have got this great book. So I've actually been asked by a lot of listeners to have an expert gardener on the show to tell us how we can start. I know I have a listener in Chicago who said, I have a small plot of land in my backyard, and I really want to start growing my own food. I just don't know where to begin. Do I buy bags of fertilizer? What do I do? So maybe let's come back to the basics for listeners who, and this is something Dr. Molly Linton or Dr. Molly Niedermeyer, who now she goes by, says that everyone should grow at least their own kale. And even if you have an apartment, hopefully if you have a patio, you can throw a kiddie pool with dirt in it and throw some seeds in it. So everyone could grow, maybe hang some tomato plants, but if everyone grew a little bit of food, that at least would be, especially you could grow greens and you can cut, a few greens. If you grow kale, you can cut a few, and that plant keeps regenerating them, so all year long you can have, or all summer long you could have fresh greens that you grew. And that's so, it's going to save you a lot of money, and it's going to be incredibly healthy.
Keep you connected
to the earth.
Growing things. And,
right.
And I'll add another layer to that, is that we sequester a lot of carbon out of the atmosphere simply by having a garden, keeping a garden.
Nice.
So plants have this incredible ability to photosynthesize, and when we're actively building soil in an organic garden, it takes enormous amounts of carbon out of the atmosphere and puts it into the soil. So this is something profound that just the simple act of nourishing yourself and nourishing the soil could play out as one of the most important practices we do for long-range climate.
I love it. Now, I like that you brought this up, because there's this idea, commercially grown food, for example, is that we are basically depleting the land, raping the land till the soil becomes totally useless, and then we have to dump so much chemicals into the land just to try to grow something. And that land, that there's the diversity of healthy flora, of healthy bacteria that long gone. The worms are long gone. That soil just becomes basically sand, and then the farmers have to use more and more chemicals to force the plants to grow. And so what we're doing is we're imposing our will upon the earth instead of working with the earth. Your way of farming, so that way of farming depletes the soil till it can no longer, it's just a desert. It can no longer hold life.
Yeah.
Your way of doing it not only grows food year after year, but it actually makes the soil stronger and healthier year after year. Is that correct?
Yeah. Now, the way that I teach organic gardening is right along the lines of how naturopathic medicine works. So the parallels are astounding. When you learn about how important your gut microflora is to your overall health and well-being, you can understand how very important the bacteria and the fungi in the soil are to the soil's well-being and the ability for the plants to have bioavailable nutrients readily in the soil. Now, what happens when we put chemicals down? That's the finished product of the bacterial breakdown of compost. So plants don't eat compost. Plants depend on the quote unquote gut flora to process that compost into bioavailable nutrients. So, what plants do is they actually take the sun's energy and carbon and water and they mix it all together, carbon dioxide, and they mix it all together into sugar and water and oxygen. This sugar, sometimes they store a little bit of it, sometimes it fuels their metabolism, but about 75% of that sugar is used as food to maintain the bacteria in the soil. They need the bacteria in the soil just as much as the bacteria need the plants for the sugars.
How interesting.
So there's this symbiosis that we take for granted because we can't see the bacteria with our naked eye. But when you hold a handful of soil and it feels moist and crumbly and it has this wonderful structure that we call tilth, when it has good tilth, it kind of looks like chocolate cake or like a brownie that's nice and moist and crummy and crumbly. And the way that that soil holds together with a little tiny bit of all of the ingredients in every crumb, a little bit of cocoa, a little bit of egg, a little bit of sugar, a little bit of flour in every single crumb, that's a lot like our soil. And the bacteria are really responsible for keeping all of the ingredients together. A little bit of clay, a little bit of sand, a little bit of potassium and nitrogen and phosphorus and all kinds of cations and nutrients. That's how it keeps the soil rich with vitamins and minerals. Once we lose the bacteria by not giving them the compost, giving them the whole foods that they depend on, that's when our soil starts to deteriorate into what you were referring to as just sand. So it is true that our soil is becoming depleted, but I would rephrase that. I would say our bacteria in the soil are starving to death and we're not nurturing that relationship well enough. And once we lose the bacteria, then the soil is unable to sustain plants without the use of those chemicals.
I've heard that even the process of tilling soil kills the bacteria. Is that true?
It's true. There are techniques to do light tilling or growing a cover crop and just flipping the top layer. But we do have some no-till techniques. There's several of them out there that are being studied right now and showing that they have higher yields, equal and higher yields than the deep tilling methods that our grandparents swore by. So our grandparents and great-grandparents have this kind of archetype of how farming and gardening should happen, how we should start each season with a rototiller or a plow or some way of getting deep into the earth and mixing it all up. But that takes a long time for those layers to settle back out where they should be and for the bacterial colonies and the fungal mycorrhiza to reestablish itself into a healthy system.
Have you, obviously you've eaten, I'm just imagining like eating vegetables from, like, say, a organic farm that does like this deep tilling, the kind of, it's just organic and that doesn't add chemicals, but it still does like the very, conventional like deep tilling method versus eating vegetables from a garden that has really been intentional about cultivating a healthy microbiome. Do they taste different?
There's so many variables. It's hard to say. I think that I'll just say yes because I'm heavily biased. But most of the gardeners that take time to grow it right and grow the soil and nurture the soil, they're also selecting varieties that happen to be really flavorful or really high in flavonoids, so they're really colorful. There's a diversity there because they might have several different kinds of crops rather than just one or two occupying the space. So there's just so many variables that it's hard to say. The small gardener is probably more likely to incorporate fresh herbs into their salads and into their soups and their meals. Whereas going to the grocery store, you might be less inclined to purchase one by one little packets of fresh herbs. So automatically, your meal might taste more bland or not as good as it could if you had a wide variety of fresh herbs to select from as you made your food.
What herbs should we all like? Let's say every listener said, "Okay, I'm going to do it. I've got a 5 by 5 space, or I've got a 20 by 20 space. Whatever amount of yard they're going to dedicate, they're going to grow some herbs so they can at least add these nutrients and these flavors to their diet. Because especially if people are leaning towards wanting to go more whole foods, more plant based. Not saying they have to be vegan or vegetarian, but just adding more whole foods to their diet, right? It's like that's then crowding out the processed foods.
Mm-hmm.
So now we're just gonna eat more actual foods, real food that's gonna really nurture us. So adding some herbs to that, it's gonna make it taste delicious. What herbs should we grow this year?
Oh boy. This year, anything in the mint family. You can mix and match those to please a lot of different palates. And that would include all of your thymes and oreganos and rosemaries. Those sound very obvious, but usually they are perennials that you'll only have to plant once. And if you're using them, it means you're clipping them back and cutting them back so that they'll bush out and shrub up in a way that each year they'll give you more and more. Normally, when we're harvesting them, we'll take the tender growing tips off of the plants, and that actually prunes them back in a way that they appreciate. So mint family plants, they want to be used.
Nice.
So your sage, thyme, oregano, even lavender is good in cookies and teas. Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I remember having I think a basil plant once, and I felt so guilty even taking one leaf off of it. I never cooked with it because I feel like I'm like cutting off an arm or something when I trim some fresh herb off of the bush. But you're saying that if you take a little bit of it, it's actually helping the plant to grow even stronger.
And you'll see where the plant likes to kind of fork off into tiny branchings. They call those axillary nodes. So when you pinch back your plant, if you pinch it back to where you can see a new shoot starting to form, then that's what it wants. So don't feel bad.
Cool.
Keep doing it. In fact, basil is one of my favorite plants for people who grind their teeth or have problems with stress tension in their neck and jaw. Just a tablespoon of fresh basil a day can be a world of difference for these people.
Really? Now, what about immune? I think we have a lot of autoimmune listeners. What kind of herbs would support their immune system that they could cook with?
Now, you mentioned immune and then autoimmune, and I don't want to put those into the same category here. So autoimmune is pretty tricky. You want to go with inflammation modulating plants. And you mentioned ashwagandha is a great one, and astragalus is a great one. These are roots that grown in our climate up here in Washington, we usually can only have one season, one harvest per year. They are not going to grow back once we dig up their roots and harvest them, right? So might not be the best choice for a gardener since it's a short season in Washington. For a general immune system, boy, there's anything that I mentioned in that mint family, spice it up, and then of course throw garlic at everything. Yeah.
Nice.
You can never have too much of that.
Very cool.
In fact, most fresh fruits and vegetables support a healthy immune system. They're alkalinizing to the body. It helps with good regular digestion. It's a daily detox of sorts when you are able to have fresh greens and cooked vegetables in every meal. Brassicas, I want to just sing the praises of all of the cruciferous vegetables, the brassicas. So that's cabbage and kale and kohlrabi. So antioxidant. And I know that, antioxidant is meaning different things now in modern times, since all plants really are antioxidant. But these brassicas are able to prevent and fight cancer and inflammation on several different levels. So in every meal, try to incorporate those. What I've done kind of by mistake is I've learned that dried kale is delicious.
Mm-hmm.
If you aren't a big fan of cooked kale, it has sort of a cabbagey, sulfury taste that maybe you burn out on, but you know you should have it every day. Try taking that fresh kale and putting it in your dehydrator or drying it out all the way and then powdering it and using that as a seasoning. It has more of a savory flavor to it than a sulfury flavor, and it's just plain delicious. So it was accidental that I grew too much kale trying to breed a new variety of kale, and I did. It's a wonderful variety of kale. It's a purple dinosaur that has magenta veins and it tastes amazing. But in the process of breeding a new variety of kale, you have to grow so much kale. And I just didn't want to keep throwing it to the chickens. So I kept drying it and powdering it, drying it and powdering it, and realizing that I actually prefer it that way.
Do you use it like garlic powder? You just put it on as as you're making a stir fry or something. You can just or put it on brown rice or just like at the end of a meal or while you're cooking.
I'll do a little seasoning mix that's equal parts kale powder, nettle powder, kelp powder, and you got to get good quality kelp. Trust me, tastes so much better. And some nutritional yeast.
Oh
so
my
mix
gosh.
those together.
That sounds
and
amazing.
You can put it on in everything. You can put it on top of your already cooked food or add it as an ingredient to eggs if you're making an omelet or a soup or a sauce. Really easy to use.
Where do we get good kelp?
My goodness. My favorite source that you can get online is Island Herbs. Island Herbs is Ryan Drum's website, and Dr. Ryan Drum is wow, he's just a brilliant man and a very dear friend of mine. Probably the best kelp I've ever had in the world. So he calls it primo kelp, and it's worth it. It tastes like potato chips. You can just eat it and eat it. It doesn't have any of that fishy, wharfy flavor that you get from the bulk kelp at the co-op or otherwise.
Now, for those who don't know, fill us in. Why would it be so beneficial, so healthy to season our food with kelp and dried nettle and the dried kale and nutritional yeast? What is it about those things that is just so healing for the body?
My 2-year-old has taught me a lot about this. When I add these things to her food, she wants more. She finishes her food. She says, "Nummy. This is nummy." And I think that we just have an instinct to go towards nutrient-dense superfoods. When you're looking at the mineral profiles of seaweed, it's pretty intense how that works. Now, for a plant to have a high mineral content on land, it simply has to diffuse with the mineral content of the surrounding water, right? It has to equilibrate with that. For a plant to have a high mineral content in seawater, it needs to hyper accumulate minerals to a very, very high level. So the potassium levels in seaweed, for example, are going to be miles ahead, hundreds of times more than the potassium levels of any land plant that you could encounter. You're going to get huge levels of minerals. And most of the time when people have anxiety, depression, when they have muscle fatigue or jitteriness, I see that as their body asking for more minerals. And usually I will recommend seaweed. Seaweed isn't something that people automatically think of a lot of the time unless they're used to it already. And in that case, I'll really have them ease into it so that they don't crave it and then have an aversion because they overdid it.
Right.
So it is salty. It does taste salty. And that can be a little bit of an aversion. After a while, you get burnt out on a salty taste. But I have a ton of recipes. So my recipe book is coming out soon. And there's a whole section on seaweed recipes that are superfood, nutrient dense, and very user friendly.
When your book comes out, you're coming back on the show and we'll promote it.
Great.
Because I know my listeners, I mean, I want it. I want to get your book, and I know that they'll want to as well. We're going to make sure that in the show notes of today's podcast at learntrout.com that there'll be the link to purchase your book, Naturopathic Gardening, which is sold at the Basti University's website. Because those who are really interested in diving into becoming great gardeners and being a good steward of their soil, so that basically we take care of the soil takes care of us. It makes sense. It totally makes sense. That they should definitely get your book. But let's kind of just start at the basics. Let's say every listener is going to grow something, maybe pick 3 vegetables. If we're totally beginners, well, what are like 3 good vegetables that are kind of easy to...
Well, instead of recommending specific vegetables, because it might not be what you like.
Okay.
Yeah. Might be better to recommend how to get started and
all right, let's
and
do
make
it.
it successful for anything that you like to grow.
All right, there you go. How do we get started?
A lot of my students. So I wrote this book for my students, for class, and my students are naturopathic physicians in training. And I found that they wanted me to sign the book on behalf of their mother or their father or a relative who was struggling with how to understand why they wanted to become a naturopath or what it meant to be a naturopathic physician.
Cool. So basically you didn't realize it, but this book that you wrote ended up becoming more than just a gardening guide.
Yeah, it's a bridge to understand naturopathic philosophy by the analogies of the garden.
Cool.
So if you're a beginning gardener, you might be looking at a place to garden in the wintertime before the leaves have come on the trees, thinking, what a great little sunny spot. So the first thing that you need to do when you have that spring fever calling to make a garden is really indeed prove that it has enough sun to sustain a garden. So that can be the biggest downfall to starting a garden, is simply without the photo, you can't have the synthesis. So if the hours of sunlight are too limited to a particular space, then it's not your fault. It's not the soil. It's not the varieties that you've chosen. It is really a rate limiting step to having a garden in the first place, is making sure that the sun shines on that spot. And then I don't care if it looks like mostly pavement. You can make that soil vibrant and vital as long as you treat it like a whole living system. So the first thing that you'll want to do is dig as deep as you can in that one spot and take a little slice of soil out, like a little core sample, to see what you've got. And depending on what that soil is composed of, you'll know automatically what to add back. If it's all clay, then you'll need to add some sand and get a lot of organic matter in there. And that'll start the right bacterial processes to start to form good soil aggregates. If you have no clay whatsoever, then you're not really able to retain nutrients well in that soil, and you might end up having a lot of nutritional deficiencies in your plants. So it might be a good idea to dig really deep into that clay layer in order to bring it up to the surface. Now, I'm not taking back what I said about deep tillage. There's a technique called double digging where you work the surface and the layers underneath separately. And yeah, it's hard to describe without drawing a picture or doing it with you. But you'll remove some of the topsoil, just a strip of it, while you have access to the underlying levels to bring some of that clay layer up closer to the surface, and then you'll put that topsoil right back down on top of it.
Okay.
Or move the next strip of topsoil over on top of that you just worked, and work your way through your garden until you leave all of the upper layers on the surface and get all the clay layers up down below. And so that keeps the bacteria and the mycorrhiza in the right place.
What about if we have sod? So we've just basically got a lawn and we want to turn some of the lawn into a garden. Do we remove the sod? Do we just put dirt over top of the sod? How does that work?
Well, that sod is a lot of organic matter. That's biomass. And you know how you feel after you drink a shot of wheatgrass. You feel energized. It's loaded with all kinds of phenolic compounds and minerals and enzymes. It's lovely stuff. So why would anyone ever want to get rid of it? It's just delightful stuff. So don't get rid of it. There's an easy way and a hard way. So the hard way is to dig and flip upside down that sod layer. So if you do have turf on top and you want to make that into a garden spot, keep that turf as beautiful, lovely organic matter. This is the whole foods that the bacteria will love to devour.
Mm-hmm.
But flip it upside down so it'll stop photosynthesizing. It will actually break down and enhance the microbial growth. If you don't want to do that because it's a lot of really hard work and maybe you have a little more time on your hands, then do the lasagna gardening technique where you take sheets of clean cardboard, so get rid of the staples and the tape, and make sure there aren't glossy pictures on it that contain inks that have a lot of solvents and heavy metals in them. Cardboard that has 3 or fewer colors is what I go for, and cardboard that hasn't been bleached white. A good place is behind a furniture store or a bicycle store where they
Nice.
just don't have a whole lot of labels for the consumer. Get great big boxes and lay that down right on top of the sod. And then on top of that, you can order a load of compost to just be dumped. Put that right on top. You can use different substrates, but you want to make sure that all of the cardboard disappears to the eye, that you can't visually see it anymore. And then the worms will come to town. So worms absolutely love moist corrugated cardboard.
Really?
And they go crazy, and then they will do all of the little tilling work for you in the first top 5 inches of your soil.
Awesome.
Takes a little time. 1 season per layer of cardboard. So that's going to be 3 months per layer of cardboard in the breaking down.
Oh, wow.
It might be something that you need to plan a year in advance. Otherwise, you'll have to end up doing a little bit of digging. But keeping it moist is key. And so keeping that cardboard completely covered will accomplish that.
Very cool. And so once we've done all that, we just like throw seeds in the ground and
You
cross
throw
your
seeds in the
fingers.
ground. You cross your fingers. So make sure that you have good spacing for your seeds.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really important that you don't crowd them out. And in my book, I do emphasize learning how to do some plant ID with baby sprouts.
Okay.
So when sprouts come up in the same plant family, they have their baby leaves that we call cotyledon leaves. Their baby leaves all look the same if they're in the same family.
Oh, so you have no idea what's what.
Right. So now, teaching through analogy, I don't know if anybody's really had this experience before. I certainly did a lot, where you disturb the soil enough to put the seeds in, and then suddenly this little carpet of baby weeds shows up before your seeds germinate, and you're waiting for your seeds to come up, but it's covered in a little ocean of baby weeds. And then you're not sure which one are the plants, which ones are weeds, and so you leave it alone and it's a big crowded mess and everything gets choked out and your plants don't thrive. So learning the little plant ID techniques for baby sprouts can make all the difference in knowing which ones are the plants that you're protecting and growing and which ones are the weeds.
Is there a way to prevent weeds from ever growing in your garden?
Yeah. Now, a lot of times we were taught to remove these weeds, throw them in the yard waste bin, and get them out of the system, right? You don't want them to go to seed. You don't want them to multiply because weeds are
It's like a war.
curse, right?
It's like a war against dandelions out there.
Right. Right. Weeds are a curse. Well, most of the garden weeds are stimulated by disturbance. And that's the very nature of these weeds. So disturbed soil is what they require in order to germinate. There are different weeds in the forest than there are in a garden because the forest puts down leaves and mulches itself. So different types of plants will grow there. Out in the garden, we're actively disturbing the soil, and very particular plants are already programmed in that soil to germinate and start growing. And I use the analogy of wound care in people. So this is the skin of the earth. This is the earth's surface. And when there's a wound, just like any wound, dehydration is a risk, infection is a risk. Boy, out there in the soil, erosion is a big risk. There's a lot at stake when you just create a big wound in the soil and make a great big disturbance. So the earth has this beautiful vital force that comes into play called weeds. The weeds are a really important part of the Earth's vital force.
I think it's like a Band-Aid.
It's like making a scab, you know? Your body makes a scab over a wound to protect those underlying tissues from drying out and becoming infected, and just kind of protects it while it heals. And then once it's healed, then the scab sloughs off, and maybe some other things are going to happen, like the hair grows back, the skin grows back, etc. Well, in the garden, wow, what wants to grow next? You've got little baby weeds, and then those die back, and then maybe some of the perennial weeds come in, like dandelions, for example, and thistles, and then maybe some little shrubs come in, or small trees like alder trees and cottonwood trees. And pretty soon, that garden is going to want to be a mature forest. That is nature. That's called succession. So as gardeners, we're saying, no, 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 just stop at weeds, please. We want vegetables. We don't want a forest. So we are naturally working against nature when we're making a garden, because we don't want a big mature forest. We want vegetables. So you see that there's a little bit of push and pull here.
Yeah.
So first of all, getting mad at the weeds is a losing battle, because as you pull the weeds out and throw them away, you're letting go of precious organic matter. This is green biomass that could be nourishing the bacteria in the soil and helping to restore balance to the surface. So why not recognize it for what it is? This is a big owie. This is a wound that needs wound care. What would you do on a person? Well, you'd probably put a nice Band-Aid on there. And if you wanted to heal quicker or to speed it up, you might put an herbal poultice on there, maybe some plantain and calendula, and put that on that wound or that burn and help it heal quicker. You can do the same thing in the garden. You know there's a wound, you know there's a healing cascade of events called weeds, and you know what's coming next is a forest to mulch that surface so that weeds don't grow anymore and it's protected. So why not be a step ahead of the game and add mulch first? Put your seeds in, maybe flag where they are, so as soon as you can recognize them, you mulch everywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
Now there's something that is really important to understand about selecting your mulch. Now, carbon and nitrogen need to be balanced for the bacteria to have the right ecosystem for growing vegetables. And when it's too heavy in carbon, it calls in fungal dominance in order to break down the wood chips or the straw or the cardboard. It's going to require nitrogen to make the enzymes to break that woody stuff down. And that robs nitrogen from the soil, making a nitrogen deficiency in your vegetables. So that can be problematic, keeping that balanced. So if the mulch that you choose to use is very carbon dense, then you need to balance it out with oodles and oodles of manure and compost and things that are very nitrogen dense.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, what happens is the plants get a nitrogen deficiency.
Where do you recommend we get manure, or horse manure, cow manure? Just buy it from bags on Amazon, or do we find a local person that owns a horse, or what do you recommend?
Well, local in this area, we have Cedar Grove, and they're a compost company that takes municipal yard waste and composts the snot out of it. I've been to their facility, and it's really amazing how the mountains and mountains of compost and huge machines to turn it and aerators. It's just overwhelming, the scale that they do this. It's wonderful. They have a mixture that's half municipal compost and half steer manure. They call it the booster blend, so you can buy it relatively inexpensively.
Is it organic? I'm wondering, with municipal, I know that some municipalities use glyphosate.
Right. And so glyphosate is not as problematic as some of the other chemicals that are in there. So glyphosate doesn't persist the way certain other herbicides do.
Okay.
So clopyralid is a type of chemical, and there's a whole family of the pyralids, and these are broadleaf inhibitors. They use them on golf courses. They use them in turf building fertilizers. These are in lawns, right? Because people don't want weeds in their lawns. They don't want weeds on the golf course. And then here's the scary part is they put it on hay and straw, and they put it in wheat fields to stop other things that could compete with the grasses.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how many things that you want to grow in your garden are grasses? How many things? Maybe corn.
Maybe, yeah.
Maybe if you're growing wheat or oats or something like that. Otherwise, everything else is a dicot and it will be inhibited. It will not grow.
Oh.
And most of the chemicals are broken down 100% in the composting process, which is lovely. I love that. Except for the chlorpyralids. They have a half-life that's more than a decade. So
oh my gosh.
It can be a huge, huge problem. So
wait, if you buy a new house and
Mm-hmm.
the previous owner used this type of stuff on the lawn to prevent dandelions, and then you come in and you want to turn it into a vegetable garden, you're pretty much screwed and you have to wait 10 years.
Yeah.
Or you have to like add several layers or do like box garden where you're
Right.
like you're shipping in your own soil, but the soil you bought in your backyard would be not even usable.
Well, yeah. Dilution and adaptation is key. And I do like to emphasize adaptation and not fearing your environment so much. And in my class, we do an exercise called the Builders and the Destroyers, where I divide the room cleanly in half so we can really take sides. And in partnerships, they write a recipe. One is a recipe for destruction. And I want them to come up with the worst thing that they can think of to kill the soil.
Mm-hmm.
The destroyers do this. And so they'll write it out in recipe format, like, take 5 tons of asphalt and roll it to a nice thick crust and then put down some nuclear waste and go on, so on and so forth. It gets pretty intense. And then we flip it to the other side of the room, and the builders have a recipe for rehabilitating from that.
Oh.
And it's a fascinating process because in the end, guess who wins?
Nature.
The rehabilitators.
Nice.
Yeah, the builders always win in the end. So even when you come into a gardening situation where you think, oh my goodness, the earth has been salted, it's so laden with chemicals, I couldn't possibly grow healthy food in this situation. Well, you might not qualify for a stamp that says USDA certified organic for 5 years. But don't let that stop you from making that soil as healthy and bountiful as it can be.
It's so cool. So basically, grow any vegetable as long as you like it. Because I was like, I'm wondering, are there vegetables that beginners shouldn't grow? Like, don't grow tomatoes. They're really hard. I don't know. Is there anything that's really hard that we shouldn't try, or is it basically like just if you're passionate about okra, doesn't care if it's complicated, grow it because you're gonna probably take care of a garden that's growing vegetables that you love versus a garden that's growing vegetables that you don't really care about.
Absolutely. Now, gardening is a continuum. You don't arrive. You never arrive. You're never a fully qualified and successful gardener.
How many years have you been gardening?
My whole life.
And
I
you're
do
still
it differently
learning?
now than my parents taught me.
Nice.
So my parents really, they did the old rototiller and weeding thing, and that's how I grew up, and I hated it. It was dusty, it was boring, it was hot. There were a lot of other things that I wished I was doing, and I do it differently now, but I learn every single season. So I'm not going to say that some things are harder and easier. There are realistic limitations with where you live. If you live in Alaska, you're going to be able to grow different things than if you live in California, right? So
Right.
You have to be a bit realistic with what zone you're in and what varieties are worth trying in those zones. Although I'm constantly amazed that seed savers and plant breeders are coming up with new varieties that are adapted to short seasons in Montana, short seasons in Alaska. It's just incredible what they've come up with. I've got this beautiful purple tomato that's a 60-day tomato that was bred in Montana, and I just am in love with it.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Speaking of seeds, are you going to sell your kale hybrid? Or is there any way we
It's
could
not
access?
a hybrid. It is a true variety.
Okay,
So
wow. Okay.
if
What
you
did you
have
did you
this,
name it?
well, purple dinosaur is about the closest we've come, but I'm still roguing it out. I'm still perfecting it. So roguing it out means that whenever you plant it, whenever you grow it out, maybe 1 out of 10 turns out not looking like you want the entire line to look like.
Oh, interesting.
And it does take quite a few generations of plants to get a nice, new, clean variety. But it's a true variety, not a hybrid. Hybrids take a little less time to come up with. Hybrids don't breed true after you save their seeds.
Oh, interesting.
I'm all about heirloom varieties, having true varieties, because I think really the key to survival of any ecosystem, whether it's the ecosystem in your gut, on your skin, the ecosystem in your community or in your garden, what have you, diversity is the key to resilience.
Mm-hmm.
And you can argue with me on that, come up with examples of when it isn't. And I have to tell you that under all circumstances, diversity is the key to resilience. And when we think about diversity being different types of things, like different types of varieties, well, we have to think about it all inclusive. Diversity doesn't just include a wide variety of maybe species or varieties within that species. It means the ones that have genetic defects, the ones that aren't perfect, the ones that aren't ideal. It's a variety of intellectual capacities. It's a variety of opinions. It's a variety of gardening practices. So I'm not on a crusade to stop all people who don't garden the same way I do. I'm on a crusade to help people fall in love with gardening in the way that fulfills them. Oh. And the more gardeners we have, the more diverse gardeners we have, the more we'll learn as a whole from one another.
What kind of health benefits have you seen take place in your patients when they started a gardening practice?
They first of all enjoy their food more by cooking more regularly. I've noticed that the food that they eat changes. So like you already mentioned, instead of going towards convenience foods or viewing cooking as kind of a chore, they're excited to bring their own harvest into the kitchen and eat it. And then they're more inclined throughout the dormant seasons, late fall, winter, when they might not be out in the garden, they're more likely to buy vegetables at the store, the ones that they enjoyed growing themselves. I did have a patient who never ate vegetables. And perhaps I've had numerous patients that never ate vegetables, but this particular patient had never even cooked a vegetable.
Oh my gosh.
And so her homework assignment was to take a bunch of kale. Don't even remove the twist tie. She thought this was crazy. Like, take an oven mitt. Use this bunch of kale to stir a pot of boiling water for 10 seconds. Now, shake off the excess water, chop it up a little bit. You can use scissors if you want to, and put whatever kind of salad dressing on it you want. She's now an avid gardener, and she loves vegetables.
That's so cool.
So sometimes all it takes is one little breakthrough to transform someone's affinity for plants in general.
What happened to her health? Can you share any details? Like, what was the before and after picture?
Well, before she was pre-diabetic and struggled with weight problems and had just suffered the loss of her mom, who died of complications of type 2 diabetes. And it was about 4 months prior to my meeting her that this had happened, and she was just terrified that this was going to be her fate. We did the best we could to take baby steps to learn about eating vegetables and cooking them yourself, let alone growing them yourself and harvesting them. She started a little walking group on Thursdays.
Nice.
And anyone could join it, but mostly it was women who were trying to lose weight and were struggling with blood sugar management. So there was a good support network there. She actually reversed her health to the point where she wasn't pre-diabetic anymore,
Mm-hmm.
and she didn't have any other reasons to keep seeing me. Her hypertension resolved, she lost a tremendous amount of weight, and so we gave her a clean slate,
It's
and I
awesome.
haven't kept in contact with her for quite a while now, but I love that it all started with a bunch of kale. Leave the twist tie on.
Very cool. I love it. And what I like about kale is that you can just when it's raw, I use it sort of like a taco, and I'll do a really nice stir fry where I'll take my favorite kind of mushrooms, and maybe I'll even throw in some cashews, and maybe a type of onion like green onion or something, and then maybe some purple cabbage, cut it all up and do a saute, and then add whatever seasoning I'm into that day. It could be like a Turkish seasoning, or could be more of an Asian themed seasoning. And then I take that thing and I put it in the kale and I hold it like a taco,
Mm,
and it's delicious. And there are times when I blanch it, like
yeah,
you suggested, in the hot water for 10 seconds, or times when I chop it up and then with a little bit of salt, massage it for a few minutes,
yeah.
and
Oh,
that
yum.
completely changes the flavor of it, makes it not bitter anymore.
And
And
it's a
then
vibrant color, isn't it?
right, and you squeeze out the a little bit of juice that came off, and then you can add that to your salad. But there's a lot of ways you can play with it. Kale came out of nowhere for me. Like, I'd never heard of kale 10 years ago. All of
Yeah,
a sudden it's just like the super
right.
vegetable everyone's
It was a
eating.
decoration, right?
Right, exactly. I never saw kale. I don't even know if kale was allowed in Canada growing up. I never saw it. Broccoli was the only green vegetable, I think. Broccoli and spinach were the only vegetables I was
Sure.
aware of.
Mostly frozen broccoli,
Right,
right?
exactly.
Yeah.
That's so cool. So I love that you see time and time again that when people incorporate gardening, even a small patch of herbs, that it could help their part of their journey to really propel them forward into better health. And because we're looking holistically at their whole life, something like spending even 10 minutes a day in that garden is bringing down their stress levels, is that
Mm-hmm.
little me time that's,
Mm-hmm.
just quiet, enjoying nature, maybe enjoying
Mm-hmm.
some sunlight, earthing, grounding. My son picked up some dirt. We were out in the garden all weekend this weekend, and he picked up some dirt and he put it right to his nose. I thought he was going to eat it for a sec because he's 3, right? And he took a deep inhalation. He goes, Mama, this smells so good. He brings it
Yeah.
up to me and puts it in my face. He goes, smell it. And at first I'm thinking, like, what are you going to do? Shove it up my nose? And then I took a deep breath and I'm like, you're right. This smells so good.
Yeah.
Like, and so he just loves dirt now, earth,
Right.
right? Because it's like the rich, like you were describing, those rich soil has a beautiful smell to it. And I
It
think that when
does.
we're in tune with things that are really healthy for us, when our senses come into play, it's like our body is resonating with it and saying, "Yeah, this is good for me.
Yeah.
This is really healthy for me." Um, you know, Dr. Megan said to me, I asked her if she had any questions that she wanted me to add. She said, I have many, but she came up with a really good one. I think it was her. I talked to a few people about this interview, and because I always love to get
Mm-hmm.
questions from other people. Um, but the question was, if you were like on a deserted island and you could have a certain amount, or you could choose maybe like 10 herbs that you could have with you, or 5 herbs, but like, what are your top sort of survival herbs, or like absolute mandatory need to be in my garden?
That is so
Um,
funny. That's part of the final exam for
is
my
it?
herbal science seniors when they are about to graduate. Give them the first half of the exam has a just top 10 survival chest desert island
No way.
scenario. What's in your medicine chest and why,
Well, and so it
right?
would be hard to fail that unless they like can't answer
Well, that's
why,
the
but
first half,
okay.
and they don't know what the second half is until they turn in the first half, and then I give them the second half, and it's a bunch of cases, like 25 different cases, and all they have is their top 10. So
How can you
how do
help
they
heal these
how do
people
they
with your
treat
top
a
10?
wide variety of conditions
Oh,
and scenarios when you only have those 10? How does that play
nice.
out?
All right, what's your 10?
So, oh my goodness, my 10, it can I say 30?
Yeah, of course.
Well, of course, Nettles is going to be a staple for me nutritionally. Ashwagandha is another one that I need quite a bit of. I use raspberry leaf a lot. I love tilia or linden flower. It's a very multi-purpose corrects texture. It's mildly hypotensive. It's friendly for all children, all health conditions. It also helps with immune function.
What does raspberry leaf do?
Raspberry leaf helps with muscles, so muscle tone as far as electrolyte balance goes. It helps with female organs. It gives you sustained energy.
But if a man were to drink raspberry leaf tea
Mm-hmm.
after a workout, would that be beneficial?
That would be fantastic.
Okay.
Yeah, raspberry leaf tea after a workout. It also works to tone the mucous membranes of the gut.
Oh.
So I believe that it's important to have a little bit of astringency, a little bit of sliminess, a little bit of fiber, a little bit of this and that. I like to have a wide variety every day in my diet, but this kind of helps with the astringent tone part of it. Trying to think of what is in my tea today. You got to have licorice root. Licorice root is something that covers all of the bases. Yarrow is a plant, and backing up, it's a toss-up. Do I say yarrow or do I say chamomile? Because they do have a lot of crossover, a lot of redundancy in their uses, but chamomile tastes a little bit better.
Well, there you
Yarrow's
go.
a little bit stronger, but
some people have an aversion to chamomile because of the pollen.
yeah, or an allergy.
Yeah.
Generally, they have an aversion to yarrow if they are allergic to chamomile, so
Okay,
that wouldn't quite work for them. Where else am I? My seaweeds, can't do without those. And I always love a ginseng in my life. So sometimes I'll go with Eleutherococcus for a while, and then I'll switch that up and have some Devil's Club for a while. And then I'll switch that up and I'll have the fresh growing ends of English ivy. I don't know if you knew that was a ginseng.
No.
But try it sometime. It's quite spicy and delicious.
Interesting.
And there's no
and what are the
shortage of it.
benefits of it? Because I've heard controversy around ginseng that you can't really gain the health benefits unless you take it for like 20 years straight. I've heard some people say that. Can you take it for an acute condition, or is it more just long-term for tonifying?
It's a modulator, so it helps with toning down an overactive immune system or overactive endocrine system, or it brings up the function. So It's a modulator. It kind of brings you to the center. There have been some studies on different constituents, different chemicals in the ginsengs, and the studies conflict. One study will say that one of the ginsenosides increases blood pressure. And then you get all these warnings about don't take ginseng if you have high blood pressure. And then another study will be studying a different ginsenoside in the same ginseng plant, and it'll have this opposite effect of lowering blood pressure. And all of the literature will say, don't ever take ginseng if you have low blood pressure. But what works is this counterbalanced result that you really help those with high blood pressure and those with low blood pressure normalize.
Yeah, it's the adaptogen is bringing back the center, like you said.
So I don't think that ginsengs, you have to take them for 25 years before you experience any benefit. We also know that some of the research with Eleutherococcus and sports medicine shows that in athletes, it enhances the oxygen uptake into the muscles quite immediately. So that can be helpful for people with fibromyalgia or with some of the conditions that limit the muscle's ability to get oxygen.
Are there any herbs that or plants that you would tell people to avoid growing, or tell people to really be cautious about?
Being a huge proponent of diversity, I would say avoid growing the boring stuff you see at the supermarket all the time.
I'm really excited because I got a lemon cucumber, and
those are
I've
fun.
never eaten one, and I'm kind of like binge watching gardening, organic gardening videos on YouTube, and there's this one guy in Michigan who was kind of doing a harvest. He has this giant vegetable garden that's like a jungle in his backyard. And they started like, let's go harvest some food and see what we get. And he starts picking things like these tiny little grape-sized watermelons.
Oh, nice.
What are they? And it's a type of, it looks like a watermelon, right? But it's a type of a cucumber that is, I don't know what is watermelon cucumber. I have no idea, but it looks like, I don't know, what's it called, a mulberry, but it's just like and then he had like 10 different varieties of cucumber that I had never seen
Yeah.
before. One sort of almost looked like a bitter melon, but it was a cucumber.
Yeah.
And I just that alone, and that was just the cucumbers, and then he moved on to all the artesian,
Right.
tomatoes and
The
and
Baker's Seed catalog.
so
If you look
cool.
in there, boy, this thing is 100 or more pages thick. But you'll learn that watermelon is one of, hundreds of melons that are out there. So around the world, we
Baker's
have
seed.
hundreds of varieties. Oh my goodness. If you look at Asian eggplants, there are so many eggplants to choose from, let alone the little purple egg-shaped one that
Right.
that you get at the store. So I recommend avoiding the ones that you see all the time, and they really don't need anybody growing them to keep them around. But a lot of the varieties that are out there that are more rare or
Mm-hmm.
heirloom varieties, they don't have enough people growing them to keep their diversity up, to
Mm.
keep their seed viable and current. So I would seek those out.
Now, what about pests? I mean, we talked about weeds, that weeds are
Hmm.
actually because we disrupted the soil, and we should put like a polis on it, that we should put,
Hmm.
some nice healthy mulch to kind of
Hmm.
help close up and heal the soil.
Yeah.
What happens when pests come? Now, I've
Okay.
heard that soil that's deplete in nutrients, so
Yeah.
basically plants that are minerally
Sure.
starved, for example, are more likely to be susceptible
Right.
to bugs eating them than those that are growing in really healthy soil.
Now tell me, why don't you suffer from a super infection all the time?
I have an immune system.
Right. Your garden does too. So when you look at pests, you have to consider that that is a normal part of the terrain, of the total picture. And your garden has an immune system in many ways. There's inherent sort of an innate immune system that exists in the plants themselves, but there's also this acquired immune system in the form of beneficial insects. And you want to have a diverse ecosystem. In order to do that, you have to have the food, the prey for the beneficial insects to even be interested in being there in the first place. So I'm doing a little study right now. I hope to publish this at the end of the season, but it's on pepper plants, green pepper plants, where I'm going to grow green pepper plants very, very close together where they're crowded, and they don't like to touch. They don't like their leaves to touch. And as soon as they get to this point where the leaves have to touch and the roots underground have to touch, they become very stressed, and suddenly aphids show up.
Interesting.
So when I hear about pests, I want to perceive them as a symptom and not as the condition that needs to be treated. So it's a symptom of immunodeficiency in the garden. And what you instead need to do is enhance the normal, healthy parts of your garden's immune system in order to combat those pests.
So, like doing something to attract ladybugs to eat the aphids?
Absolutely. Yeah, ladybugs are attracted to the aphids anyway.
Okay.
But if the plant is so stressed out, it may not be able to overcome the aphids. Even with all the ladybugs in the world, that's not going to remove the cause of the stress. What would remove the cause of the stress would be to transplant them further apart from each other.
Mm-hmm.
So there's something called a review of systems that physicians do, where they kind of take a look at every system, say how is your digestive system working,
Right.
and tell me about your urinary tract, and we're going to go system by system and see big picture stuff. What else might be going on that could be contributing to this, or a hidden cause that I'm overlooking? Do the same in your garden. Say, is the water management happening okay? Is the soil structure where it should be? Is there a crowding problem? Is there a compaction problem? Is there a problem with sunlight?
What's a compaction problem?
Compaction problem can happen chemically or electrically, ionically, by too much clay in the soil. So clay can sort of compact all on its own because it has sort of a negative charge that creates compaction. Or walking on it can cause compaction.
Okay.
And that can be problematic for some of our vegetables Not so for weeds and some of the native plants, but the plants that are adapted to compact soils. But most of our garden vegetables would prefer it if we didn't have compact soil.
Right. Do you go through a lot of this in your book?
Yes, absolutely.
Cool. Awesome. So for a completely new gardener, they could go through your book and they could get a lot of great tips on how to successfully garden.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool. Yeah.
It's just like naturopathic medicine has a bit of a different perspective.
Right.
When you garden with the same philosophy, you have to stand back and look at the whole garden as one living organism. And see what your role is before you take action, even if you have a role.
Very cool.
Maybe the garden is going to come into balance. The first thing I teach my students when we talk about pests is that aphids are a sign of a healthy garden.
Really?
When you have aphids in the early spring, it means that you're going to have ladybugs. You're going to have food for the hummingbirds to eat before the flowers are on the trees. You see?
Oh, interesting.
So these aphids are so very important for attracting the beneficials to that garden system. So be delighted when you see them and you know what's going to follow without intervening. If you poison them or destroy them in any way.
Right, you're totally disrupting the food chain.
That food web is really a crucial part
what about
of having
snails
balance.
and slugs and other pests like that?
I don't know if I can have the same love for snails and slugs as I do for aphids. But we do have a lot of beetles and small predators that eat slugs and slug eggs. So the ecosystem in balance is key.
Got it.
And then if you need to install a duct,
literally a duck,
there's also some cultural practices that can affect your slugs. So watering at nighttime makes slugs go crazy.
So water in the morning?
Yeah, water in the morning. Not in the heat of the day because that's not water efficient. But in the morning, you'll reduce your slug activity by about 80%.
Wow.
Yeah, slugs are nocturnal. So, and the wetter the ground is, the more they're attracted to that space. So watering in the evening is really often the cause. So treating the cause of the slugs can be a huge part of it.
We've got like the banana slugs out here, and I can't go into my garden or my yard barefoot because I've stepped on one before, and it is the worst sensation in the world. Because first of all, I'm feeling incredibly guilty. I just destroyed a being with my foot.
Yeah.
But then I had to feel the entire thing squish under my foot.
It just doesn't wash off very easily either, does it?
No. Yeah. But I definitely don't want them in my garden. Now, what about those kind of, let's say, those giant green caterpillars that eat the tomatoes, for example? What are they called? The horned somethings?
We don't really have hornworms here. At least not in my garden. Oh, no. You shouldn't have the hornworms eating your tomatoes in this garden. Here in Washington.
But we have listeners all around the world. And
right. Those things, you can watch them consume the plant.
The entire plant. They look like aliens.
Row of plants. Yeah.
Right.
They're awful, aren't they?
Yeah. What can we do to prevent that? Or is it a matter of just walking out to the garden with a bucket and picking caterpillars off the plants?
That is a huge part of it, is you can be the beneficial insect sometime who has to get out there and pick the pest off manually and identify the eggs, know what the eggs look like so that you can get those out of there too. They're pretty big. Hornworm eggs are pretty big. And then bird perches, making sure that there are places for the birds to perch and observe those big worms.
Nice.
Yeah, making sure that you invite the predator.
Right.
Yeah.
Good call. Inviting the birds. It's a really good call. I don't want to scare people off from starting to garden by talking about all these, scary things.
I know. Well, the scary thing for us in tomatoes here is the blight.
What is the blight?
The blight it's a type of a water mold that affects the tomato plants very late in the season. So you'll have plants covered in green tomatoes, and just the week before they ripen up, the whole row of tomatoes turns black and keels over. Yeah.
How can you prevent that?
That's a really tough one to prevent, actually, because once it's in your soil, it can persist in the soil for quite some time. So, making sure that you have adequate drainage, that there's good airflow through your tomato patch, not planting them out too early because the plants can live with blight for the entire season in a low grade, asymptomatic way. So, making sure that you don't plant them out too early during the rainy season, but rather wait as late as possible, late June, to put them out.
Really?
Yeah, and a
Oh,
lot of growers will create a cloche or a hoop house of plastic to really reduce the moisture in the late fall and keep it so hot that blight can't persist. I examine my tomatoes very carefully before planting them out in the garden. If I see any little gray or brown patches on their stems, then they're not going to go in the garden. They're going to go in a pot somewhere far away from the garden until I know for sure.
got it.
Yeah.
That's cool. Um, is there anything else that you think we should know to just start us on this journey? Any resources we should look into or know about? Imagine all the listeners are sort of now your 101 students. They're about to go out and start their own garden.
About to go out and start it. Well, roll with your instincts and read as many different gardening opinions as you can get your hands on. I love John Jevons. I love Steve Solomon. These are some authors that have written amazing books, book resources. There's different ways to garden for small spaces, for raised beds, for large spaces, for not having enough water. Um, it's always a matter of learning. Right now, my learning curve is wicking beds. So I've just installed wicking beds because I don't want to have to water during the dry season.
Mm-hmm.
So, how can you have a lush garden grow without water? I think I did it last summer, but this is my second year to try and prove that it does indeed work.
Well, we had like
So, wicking
70.
beds.
We had 70 days without rain last year.
Yeah.
So if you successfully did not water and had
I'm
your
not
vegetables
saying that
grow,
any of my inventions have been wildly successful, but this one actually works. So we're going to prove it again this year and see if we can not water the garden even once and have these wicking beds be successful.
very cool. And if someone wants to learn more about wicking beds, because maybe they live in an area that
Mm-hmm.
they too have a long dry season,
Mm-hmm.
are there some resources that you could point us?
I mostly learned online. I did a Google search of images and saw what they had in common. So if
Okay.
you look at images, it'll give you a cross section of the different layers involved. And then depending on what your resources are, you might have a hill, you might have um, gravity in your favor to help take whatever surface water is produced from your gutters
Mm-hmm.
or really any sources and get that to participate in your wicking bed system. So every answer is going to be a little bit unique to the user.
Awesome.
So take home message is don't be afraid to try everything.
Nice.
And when you don't have a success, I instead of becoming discouraged, please understand that your failures are as important, if not more important, than your successes because your whole life you're going to be learning new things and your failures do matter.
Absolutely. And especially like in our own health journey, the failures matter because we just learned what didn't work, and that helps rule other things out, and really helps if we take the learnings instead of focusing on the failure, focus on the learnings, then we can build a strong garden, build a strong body. Thank you so much for spending the time with us. I know that you aren't necessarily taking on new patients, but if someone really wanted to contact you, had questions for you,
Sure.
you're saying that they could find you through reaching out to Basti University and asking to connect with you.
Absolutely. You can call me at Bastyr University. You can email me at jdazey@bastyr.edu.
Awesome. Well, the link to your book, Naturopathic Gardening, is going to be in the show notes of today's podcast at learntrout.com and available at the Basti University's bookstore, basically online. And then when you come out with your recipe book, you've got to come back And what?
Absolutely. I'll bring samples.
Oh, good. That seasoning. I can't wait to create it. So we've got dried kale, we have nutritional yeast, dried nettles, and then the kelp. And you blend it all. Is it equal parts of all four?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I can't wait to get to try it, experiment on my 3-year-old and see, if he starts thinking everything's yummy.
I put it on popcorn. So I'll do a wet mix that's just like a clove of garlic pressed into whatever oil you want, maybe some blended nuts along with it, and coat the popcorn with that a little bit first so that the powder sticks to it. But it makes a wonderful popcorn seasoning, and kids love it. They do, even though it's green.
Nice.
Love it. So
very cool.
Give it a try with him. Tell me what feedback he has for you. Maybe I can.
Hopefully it's yummy.
Yeah, I hope so too. I'm also doing a workshop coming up on June 2nd at Basti called "Weeds Are in the Eye of the Beholder," and we'll just be focusing on the edible and nutritional qualities of weeds, and we'll be cooking them up and having some samples there too.
Oh, that's so great. I know, because dandelions, dandelions have healed my body.
No, don't get me started on dandelions. They're so yummy.
I have had entire, just roasted dandelion tea. I have had incredible results drinking that for weeks on end, and really feeling the benefits. And so when I asked Dr. Megan, I said, you want me to grow something for you in my garden? She goes, yeah, dandelions. We had a good laugh about it because we know what healing they are.
I trained my 2-year-old to pick the blossoms, and she loves to help me make dandelion fritters. They're like little dumplings.
Oh my gosh. And is that going to be in your cookbook?
Sure. Absolutely.
Very cool. Now,
lots of dandelion recipes.
If someone wanted to can anyone attend your workshop at Basti?
Free and open to the public.
Really?
I believe it's at 1 p.m.
On what day?
June 2nd. So if you haven't heard about it before, and I know you have, it's the Basti Herb and Food Fair.
Yes.
And we're in our 20th year of putting that fair on.
Nice. Well, I will definitely be attending that, because I think I have to buy some seeds there at the herb fair.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to that. So,
and also, if you want medicinal herb starts for your garden, please come.
Oh, that sounds great. Well, I'll make sure all that information is in the show notes of today's podcast. It has been such a pleasure having you here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ashley.
Hello, true health seeker. Have you ever thought about becoming a health coach? Do you love learning about nutrition and how we can shift our lifestyle and our diet so that we can gain optimal health and happiness and longevity? Do you love helping your friends and family to solve their health problems and to figure out what they can do to eat healthier? Are you interested in becoming someone who can grow their own business, support people in their success? Do you love helping people? You might be the perfect candidate to become a health coach. I highly recommend checking out the Institute for Integrative Nutrition. I just spent the last year in their health coaching certification program, and it really blew me away. It was so amazing. I learned over 100 dietary theories. I learned all about nutrition, but from a standpoint of how we can help people to shift their life and shift their lifestyle to gain true holistic health. I definitely recommend you check them out. You can Google Institute for Integrative Nutrition, or IIN, and give them a call, or you can go to learntruehealth.com/coach, and you can receive a free module of their training to check it out and see if it's something that you'd be interested in. Be sure to mention my name, Ashley James, in the Learn True Health podcast, because I made a deal with them that they will give you the best price possible. I highly recommend checking it out. It really changed my life to be in their program, and I'm such a big advocate that I wanted to spread this information. We need more health coaches. In fact, health coaching is the largest growing career right now in the health field. So many health coaches are getting in and helping people, because you can work in chiropractic offices, doctors' offices, you can work in hospitals, you can work online through Skype and help people around the world. You can become an author, you can go into the school system and help your local schools shift their programs to help children be healthier. You can go into senior centers and help them to shift their diet and lifestyle to best support them in their success and their health goals. There's so many different available options for you when you become a certified health coach. So check out IIN, check out the Institute for Integrative Nutrition. Mention my name, get the best deal. Give them a call and they'll give you lots of free information and help you to see if this is the right move for you. Classes are starting soon. The next round of classes are starting at the end of the month. So you're going to want to call them now and check it out. And if you know anyone in your life who would be an amazing coach, please tell them about it. Being a health coach is so rewarding and you get to help so many people.